We just kind of heard a whoosh and some smoke. We looked around and no one really knew what was going on.
I could see the helicopter fall and tumbling, and then there was an eerie silence for the last part of the fall.
Friday night in a busy Glasgow pub. For a while, the music distracted from the impact. Then the roof came in.
We kind of looked again and the roof was kind of gradually coming down, but not a significant amount. And then someone started shouting and the bands were kind of like, oh, cut the music. And we walked around the corner just to have a look and see what was going on. And then all of a sudden just this cloud of dust came. And you couldn't breathe for inhaling like a mouthful of dust. You couldn't see anything.
It was from outside the Clutha Vaults bar. The scale of the disaster was much clearer. Before fire and rescue services could get there, the first responders were passers-by. Among them, the Labour MP Jim Murphy.
Those who were injured were calm. They were, I'm not a doctor, but maybe in shock, and there was nobody running. Well, the strange thing is there was a big group of people, there's a lot of dust, but nobody was running away from the scene. In fact, people were running towards the scene.
Some survivors were able to walk away, but there is an unconfirmed number still inside who couldn't. There have been numerous casualties, but the police are not confirming numbers. The building is unsafe, and it's unclear just how many people may still be trapped inside.
Our officers are working very hard in what is a very complex and hard environment for them tonight. We're in the process at the moment of making the building stable. It's very unsafe, but we're there, we're carrying out extensive work, and we'll be here for as long as it takes to make sure that we get those rescues done.
Police have confirmed that 2 officers and a civilian pilot were on board the helicopter. They've revealed nothing about their condition or injuries to anyone else in the bar. But First Minister Alex Salmond warned there would more than likely be fatalities.
We are coordinating the operation tonight with colleagues from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and Scottish Ambulance Service, who are working to make the scene safe and recover people from the scene. That rescue operation is clearly ongoing.
Search and rescue dogs and expert handlers are now on the scene, trained to find survivors who rescuers can't see. Firefighters now say this is a methodical search and rescue operation, and air accident investigators are on standby to establish just what went so wrong. Jane Chilton, Sky News, Glasgow.
The perfect vantage point, because I was on the 6th floor of the multi-storey with no roof above me. So I actually saw it as it fell from the sky, and the reason I was alerted to it was because I could hear the misfiring engine. So I was looking above me because it sounded really close, and actually, as I kind of realised what was going on, I thought it was a plane that was going to crash or something like that. I looked up to the sky, I was looking around me, and I could see the helicopter fall and tumbling, but the rotor's not moving at a really strange angle. And then there was an eerie silence for the last part of the fall. But the thing that was disturbing and shocking then was that there was no explosion. I couldn't understand why a helicopter would fall from that height and not explode. And I ran from where I was sort of cowering behind my car because it was heading in my direction, and I ran to the opposite side of the car park and looked over to see if I could see anything, but I couldn't see past a block of residential flats. But what I could see was people running in the direction of the crash between the buildings, which, you know, I just... looking back at it, it's an incredible thing to see people running towards an incident like that.
Did you also see people coming out of the pub after a certain time?
No, because I couldn't see from the angle I was, where I was in relation to the collision, where I was in relation to the accident. So I made my way down 6 flights, ran round to what's called the Broomy Law, and ran towards it. And as I was running towards it, I could see the police cars and fire engines passing me, and they closed off the area. So at that point I ran back towards my office, and as I was passing Argyle Street, I saw some policemen and said, listen, I've seen a helicopter crash. And they just couldn't believe it when I told them. And then they got on the radio and found out what was going on, took my details, and then I came straight into the office.
The area is, I suppose it would be very busy on a Friday night, wouldn't it? I mean, it's payday. Generally, what sort of a social area is it?
Yeah, well, you're only 5 minutes from the main shopping drag in Glasgow, Argyle Street. The St Enoch Centre is within about 200, 300 metres. And we check now on Google Maps to get the exact distance. So from Buchanan Street in Glasgow, which is one of the most famous shopping streets, you're talking about 500 metres. It really is very close to the city centre. And like I say, I've been out for dinner tonight and was heading around to get my car to go home, and I was passing lots of people out for pubs and clubs. As you know, Glasgow's a very lively city, and there have been a lot of people out. I mean, one thing I would say is that there were 4 or 5, probably 4 policemen on Argyle Street. So there were plenty of people in the area to go and help and offer assistance.
Final question, Gordon. I know you're probably very busy. Did you see any movement once that helicopter had landed?
No, like I said, it was an incredibly eerie spell, because after it happened, I was expecting to hear sirens straight away, and as I ran down the stairs, and there was no noise at all other than me panicking and being out of breath and making my way there. I just really couldn't quite believe what I'd seen.
Something really dreadful's happened tonight, and I arrived, I think, just almost immediately after the helicopter crashed into the roof of this pub. And when I arrived, there was no noise and no panic. There was no sound from the helicopter. Those who were injured were calm. They were, I'm not a doctor, but maybe in shock, and there was nobody running. Well, the strange thing is there was a big group of people. There's a lot of dust, but nobody was running away from the scene. In fact, people were running towards the scene, because the emergency services weren't here yet, and they got here really quickly, as quickly as I'm sure it's in any way humanly possible. But when I arrived, there was just a sense that something dreadful's happened, and how can people help? And I think that's what people tried to do in their own small ways.
What did you manage to do?
I don't want to talk too much. I did what any human being would do, which is work out what you can do. I'm not a doctor, so it's not my job to treat people's wounds. I'm quite big and quite tall, and I thought the best thing I can do is try and lift people. So there was this kind of human chain, people further in the pub than me, trying to grab people out, and there was a small line of people, and you basically got past the person, and you tried to pass them to the person next to you to try and get them from harm's way. But I did very little compared to some other people who were, I'm no doubt, trying to rescue friends or even loved ones or family from the scene behind us.
How surprised are you that this was a helicopter that crashed into the roof of the pub? There was no fire, no explosion.
It's talking to some of the people who were injured. They were puzzled and just wanted to know what had happened, because they hadn't heard anything. They hadn't heard the noise of a helicopter coming down on top of the pub. But I think the strange thing for everybody is you're trying to help in any way that you can, just any little way that you can, is that there's a helicopter in the roof of this pub. There's no fire and there's no explosion, and you're thinking, why not? And when might that happen? Now, fortunately, that hasn't happened. I'm not an expert in the design of helicopters, but that's in the back of your mind. How can as many people get away from this pub as quickly as possible before possibly there is a fire or an explosion?
How far into the pub were you? Did you go inside or was it outside?
You couldn't get fully inside the pub. The damage was such. There was people who had got a few yards in, who were trying to grab through the debris, and the damage to get people out. And I just joined that line of people. I was just inside the pub and trying to help drag people out and do what you can, and then trying to help the people who were injured until the emergency services got here. And they got here quickly, and they are doing brilliantly. And I think in a tragedy like this, the only good thing is that it's in the city centre, so close to a major hospital, and people are only genuinely less than 2 minutes in an ambulance. to a great hospital and the best care that they can possibly have, and hope. And yeah, some people will pray, but certainly hope that those people are treated safely tonight.